For decades, if we wanted to test things like memory or reaction time, we'd sit someone down at a computer. But is that really the best way? Well, a fascinating 2025 study by Corsi and his colleagues decided to put that to the test. They pitted traditional PC-based assessments against these new, immersive versions in virtual reality. And the results might just change how we think about measuring the human mind.
Just think about it for a second. When you take a test on a computer, is it really testing your memory? Or is it kind of testing how quickly and comfortably you can use a mouse and keyboard? This is the core problem this whole research project gets into. It asks, does your experience as a gamer or just someone who uses a computer all day give you an unfair leg up? Does it skew the results of what's supposed to be a pure test of cognition?
So, in this explainer, we're going to follow the science. First, we'll break down the known issues with standard PC tests. Then, we're going to step right into the virtual lab and see exactly how the researchers designed their experiment. After that, we'll get into the surprising results, uncover what they call the tech-skill divide, and finally, ask the big question: what does all this mean for a fairer future of testing?
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. What's actually wrong with the way we've been doing things for so long? Why are we even looking for a new approach? Well, the issues with those traditional computerized tests really boil down to two major concerns.
The first issue is this concept scientists call ecological validity. It sounds fancy, but the idea is actually super simple. It's just asking, how well does a test in a lab predict how you'll perform out in the real world? I mean, clicking on 2D boxes on a flat screen is a totally different thing than, say, trying to remember where you parked your car in a huge garage. Our world is 3D, complex, and most PC tests just aren't.
So that's problem number one. They don't feel like real life. But problem two is the real kicker for this study, the tech skill problem. There's a ton of evidence showing that people with more computer and gaming experience just do better on these tests. Their hand-eye coordination with a mouse is better, their reaction times are faster, and that means the test might be measuring how digitally savvy you are, not just the cognitive skill it's supposed to. This creates a really serious bias, one that could put older adults or anyone with less tech access at a real disadvantage. So, to get to the bottom of these problems, the researchers designed a kind of showdown, a direct, head-to-head comparison. They wanted to see if immersive VR, with its much more natural physical way of interacting, could offer a better way forward. Let's see how they set it all up.
The setup was really straightforward, but super smart. They brought in 66 participants, and each person performed 3 classic cognitive tasks. But here's the key. They did each task twice, once on a normal PC and once in a fully immersive VR headset. This design is great because it lets you make a really clean, direct comparison between the two platforms for every single person.
All right, so the first task up was the digit span. This is a super common test for verbal working memory. Now, because it's all about hearing and then repeating numbers, the researchers figured there probably wouldn't be much of a difference between the PC and VR versions. It was basically their control test. So here's how it worked. Participants would hear a sequence of numbers spoken to them. Then a keypad would pop up, either on the screen or just floating in front of them in VR. And their job was to punch in those numbers, but in the reverse order they heard them. Pretty simple, right? It's all about that verbal memory. Now for the second task, the Corsi Block task, things start to get a lot more interesting. This is a famous test of what we call visual spatial memory. Basically, your ability to remember where things are in space. And this is exactly the kind of task you'd think might be totally different in a 3D environment. For this one, participants see a bunch of cubes, and then a few of them light up, one after another, in a sequence. Just like the number task, the goal is to remember that sequence and then touch the cubes in the reverse order. Now think about the difference here. On a PC, you're clicking on 2D squares. In VR, you're physically reaching out and touching 3D cubes in space. The final test was a reaction time task, and this one is all about raw speed. It's a pure measure of how fast your brain can see something, process it, and then trigger a response from your body. The instructions couldn't be simpler. You see a cube, and the second it turns blue, you touch it, as fast as you possibly can. On the PC, that meant slamming a key. In VR, it meant a quick physical poke at the virtual object. And of course, the researchers were measuring the time down to the millisecond. Okay, so the stage is set, the tests are done, so what did they find? Well, this is where a really interesting puzzle started to emerge from the data. The results were definitely not what you might expect at first glance. So first, let's just talk about the experience itself.
how people felt about it. And it wasn't even close. Participants overwhelmingly preferred the virtual reality version. They rated it as way more usable, more supportive, and just generally more engaging than the old PC interface. No big shock there, right? VR is cool. But keep this preference in mind, because it's a key piece of our puzzle. Now here's where it gets weird. Look at the actual performance data. For that verbal memory test, scores were basically a wash, just like they predicted. But for the other two tasks, the PC actually won. Participants got higher scores on the spatial memory task and were a lot faster on the reaction time task when they were using the good old personal computer.
And this brings us right to the heart of the mystery. People love the VR experience more, they found it easier to use, and yet their raw scores were worse. How is that possible? How do you explain that paradox? Well, the answer is the single most important finding of this entire study.
To solve this puzzle, the researchers had to dig deeper. They looked past just the average scores to find out what was predicting a person's performance. And what they found was this huge, clear divide between the two technologies.
And boom, here it is. This is the absolute key. When they ran the numbers, they found that how well you did on the PC was significantly predicted by your prior experience with video games and computers, and also by your age. But the VR tests, your score was almost completely independent of those factors. It just didn't matter how much of a gamer you were or how skilled you were with the computer.
And this quote from the paper just nails it. That better performance on the PC, it wasn't necessarily a sign of better thinking. It was, as they put it, an artifact of the interaction modality. Basically, a side effect of the interface itself. The PC tests were rewarding tech-savvy users. But VR, with its more intuitive, physical movements, just leveled the playing field and stripped those biases away, giving a much purer look at cognition.
This discovery is a really big deal. It suggests we might be on the verge of a brand new and much more equitable way to assess the human mind. So let's break down why this really matters.
So let's just do a quick recap of the big takeaways. We know VR is more engaging, people like it more. But the crucial part is that it seems to give us a cleaner signal of someone's cognitive ability, one that isn't tangled up with their tech skills. This makes it a potentially fairer platform, one that's accessible to everyone, no matter their background. And as a little bonus, cool features like the eye tracking they used can even separate the time it takes you to notice something from the time it takes you to react, which gives scientists an even more detailed picture. Ultimately, the thing you should take away from all of this is the potential for fairness. Whether you're in a clinic trying to diagnose cognitive decline or in a research lab just trying to understand the mind, the goal is always to get the most accurate measurement you can. And by removing that bias of technological skill, VR assessments might just get us closer to that goal than we've ever been before.
And that leaves us with this one final big thought to chew on. You know, we've always used the best tools we had at the time to study our own minds, from paper and pencil tests all the way up to computer programs. The question now is whether immersive tech like VR is the next great leap forward, a tool that could finally let us see our own cognitive abilities with a clarity we've just never had before.